The final piece of the puzzle for really peak product managers is influencing people. Product management is a rare role in that it starts as a leadership-oriented role from the very beginning. So APMs and PMs are really focused on leading the stakeholders around them. And then that element of leadership gets more and more emphasized as a person becomes more senior. So the first part of leadership for a product manager is stakeholder management. And I think a really key thing that I've learned about stakeholder management over the years is that actually that's the wrong term. Stakeholders don't want to be managed as much as they want to be included. And so really good PMs are able to create a circle around all the people that are interested in the product that they're working on and bring them into a virtual team and tap into all of their energy around the idea that you're building towards, and leverage that energy to deliver on really effective products.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful Tuesday evening. We're excited to kick off another event for Product Mastery Series with Ravi Mehta, the former Chief Product Officer at Tinder, which it was the #1 monetizing app. I didn't actually know that. It's quite interesting. Ravi will be talking about the PM Competency Toolkit. Whether you are an associate product manager or a chief product officer, you can use this framework to assess where you stand on the skill sets required to be a peak product manager. The format of the talk will be a 25-minute talk followed by Q&A. So please feel free to ask your questions in the chat and we'll address them after Ravi's presentation. After we wrap up at about 7:50, you'll have the opportunity to virtually network with your peers. Both Ravi and I will be networking, so you get to meet us as well. We encourage all of you guys to go and meet a fellow product manager, product leader during the networking session. With that, Ravi, I'll have you kick it away.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you, Mo. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk to everyone today. I've heard some exceptional things about product faculty. So, happy and excited that you invited me to participate. So the thing that I want to talk about today is a framework that I've developed over the years to help product managers think about the skills that they need to succeed and to deliver impact to their companies. And one of the things that we'll talk about as well is how people take on different shapes and have different strengths in different development areas, and how ultimately a successful product team taps into the ability of people to understand the things that they're good at and then surround themselves with complementary people so that a team is greater than the sum of its parts, so that people fit together like puzzle pieces into something that feels really coherent and allows the team to accomplish something that no one person ever could. So brief introduction about myself. Most recently, I was the Chief Product Officer at Tinder. I've been in consumer technology and product management my entire career. I actually started programming when I was young. I was 9 years old when I got a computer. There wasn't much to do back then other than to learn how to code. And so I started building games at a young age. And right after college, joined Microsoft, where I became one of the first members of the Xbox team. And one of the most exciting parts of my career has been working on products that have impacted millions of users at Microsoft, at Tinder, at Facebook. But the thing I'm most proud of, and this is something that I've really developed over the last kind of 5 to 7 years, it's not just building products, but building the teams and building the people that are creating those products. I've really enjoyed coaching PMs. Many of the folks that I've hired directly out of school who had never had product management experience today are now directors and VP level product leaders within their organizations. And that's an outcome that's better than any product or feature that I've shipped. And so hoping today to share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way of helping people level up as product managers. So I started in product management at Microsoft. Microsoft was one of the early companies that really started to define what the product management role is. And an early mentor at Microsoft told me, product managers are like the mortar in a brick wall. Like mortar, they must fluidly fill the gaps between the bricks to make the whole wall stronger. And that analogy has really stuck with me throughout the years. And I think it resonates even more today than it did back then. There's so much more complexity in terms of technology and products than there was when I started. And product management today continues to be a really fluid, connected, demanding role. It varies considerably from company to company. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so exciting. It's also one of the things that makes it so challenging. But one of the things that I think is true, no matter how product management is defined in an organization, is the job that product managers have. And ultimately, the job that product managers have is to not just ship features. The really great product managers think about their role as delivering business impact. And so they want to do that not just for their company, but also for their users, also for the team, and also for themselves. And so this idea that you don't just ship features, you really are meant to deliver business impact is really central to everything that I'm going to talk about today. But delivering business impact is hard, and it's only getting harder. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of moving parts. The strongest PMs are really intellectual athletes who excel at a diverse, mutually reinforcing set of skills and can understand how they fit within an organization and how to fit the rest of the organization around those skills. So let's take a look at what I consider to be the 12 competencies of peak product managers. This is a framework that I developed initially at TripAdvisor, working with the product team. At the time, we wanted to grow the product team very quickly. We were bringing people into the product organization who had not had product management experience prior. One of the most successful things that we did at TripAdvisor was we created a product management rotation program where we hired business school graduates who had not been PMs previously to come in and do 4 rapid 6-month rotations over the course of 2 years to give them a wide range of product experience and really level them into the role. And as we did that, I started to think about what makes product managers exceptional. And we developed this framework of 12 competencies organized into 4 areas. So the 4 areas of product competency are product execution, which is really fundamentally about the ability to build exceptional products. Consumer insight, which is about the ability to understand and deliver on customer needs. Product strategy, which is the ability to drive business impact via product innovation. Influencing people, which is the ability to rally people around the team's work and around the product that's being built. So there's a lot here. There's a lot for PMs to master. One of the interesting and challenging things with the product role as well is there's tension between some of these different skills. Oftentimes people that are really great at user experience design aren't quite as good at fluency with data. And so there's these natural tensions that come into play. And product is really this interesting role where it requires strengths at opposite ends of a spectrum. PMs need to be both empathetic and analytical. They need to be both qualitative and quantitative. They need to be able to think in grand, abstract, conceptual, strategic terms, as well as have a fastidious attention to detail. And really the best PMs master 2 things. They're both creative innovators and they're rigorous optimizers. And if you can do both of those at the same time, you can build products that drive maximum results for the company and for users. So let's take a look at each of these competency areas in more detail. And then I'll describe how you can evaluate yourself using the competencies and how to interpret what you're good at, what your strengths are, and how to rally a team around some of the areas that are complementary with your strengths. So the first area of competency is product execution. Ultimately, peak PMs strive to execute flawlessly. They know that there's already enough risk in understanding consumer needs and crafting a strategy around those needs. They can't afford unforced errors. So peak PMs strive to execute as well as possible so that they eliminate that as a risk from the process. And there's really 3 skills that are necessary to achieving peak execution. The first one is delivering a great functional specification for whatever it is that you're trying to build. And one of the things I feel strongly about is I don't think great functional specs have to take any particular form. There was an example at TripAdvisor where someone came to product review with a spec written on a napkin. And what's really important is not that a spec has particular sections or hits particular points, but that it really rallies the team around the goal that the product manager is trying to strive for and provides enough detail and enough context for the team to execute flawlessly against that goal. The second thing is product delivery. So product delivery on a really good team is fast, it's iterative, good product development teams work quickly, but they also work towards predefined goals. And so ultimately, product delivery is at its best, it's almost sort of a controlled chaos where you have product teams that are moving really quickly, that are iterating, that are learning, but are doing so in a way that's calibrated against goals so that you're moving as quickly as possible towards a predetermined outcome and changing the outcome as you learn more about what you're trying to achieve and about what customers really want. The third piece of product execution is quality assurance. So quality is your product's most important feature. I heard an interesting anecdote from Spotify where they actually don't even allot time for product work until they know that all of the important bugs have been fixed. And so quality comes first at Spotify. And this, I think, is an example that a lot of other companies could take. If I think about my experience with Spotify, I can't even remember the last time Spotify got in the way of me enjoying music. And so there's not any feature that I'm missing with Spotify, but if Spotify were to crash, if it were to take longer to buffer, if it were to skip in songs more often, that would be something that no matter what feature Spotify had would actually lead it to no longer having product market fit with me as a customer. So quality is an essential part of product execution. The second area of competency is really around customer insight. And so product managers, more than anyone else in the organization, are really the cultural ambassadors for their customers. And great product managers don't just seek to understand users, they seek to empathize with the people that their product serves and to really understand and empathize with the problems they're trying to solve and feel personal responsibility for solving those problems. Customer insight at its highest level breaks down into 3 skills. The first one is fluency with data. And fluency with data for me goes beyond just reporting on what's happening. I think peak PMs are obsessively focused on figuring out the causal relationships using data so that they're understanding what are the underlying behaviors that lead to valuable outcomes for users and for the company. And so this idea of causality is incredibly important towards being great with data. Your goal is not just to report, it's to learn from the data and to extract that learning into things that you can use to make better decisions. The second skill within customer insight is voice of the customer. So the only way to truly empathize with people is to talk to them. You can't really understand what drives someone only through the numbers. And what I've seen happen is that at a lot of early stage companies, there's no choice other than to talk to the customer. There's no data to work with. There's very limited things to do other than to go directly to the customer, understand how the product is being used in their lives, and to use that signal to make the product better. But as companies grow, that skill of talking to customers tends to atrophy. And at bigger customers, product managers tend to get further and further away from the customers. So customer support people talk to customers, and maybe every once in a while you'll do a focus group and talk to customers. And that process of talking to customers becomes heavier and more onerous, but it's really fundamental towards understanding what companies or what customers want. And so what happens when that voice of the customer gets more and more attenuated within an organization, is PMs tend to start solving for the things that are really easy to measure, which are company goals like revenue, rather than things that are harder to understand and harder to measure, like what is the specific need that a customer has. And so really important, no matter what level in the organization you are, no matter how big your company is to really value the conversations that you're having with customers and use those to understand what are the needs that you want to solve for. The next skill is user experience design. So, I believe peak PMs emphasize interaction design as an explicit and critical phase of product development. What I see often happening with teams is that you go straight from functional specification into visual design of the product and skip a really fundamental phase, which is thinking about visually, how do I bring my specification into being? How do I make sure that the right user interface, the right user experience is surfaced to users so that the problem that they have is something that they can solve quickly, easily, effortlessly through the product that you're delivering to customers. So ultimately, one of the things that I've found over the years is that good specs tend to be visual and not verbal, and that a spec really isn't done until you started the process of wireframing, which is an important step in the interaction design of a really high quality product. The third area of product competency is product strategy, which is ultimately the glue that joins product development together with company strategy. So product strategy requires PMs to consistently deliver features that build towards a coherent roadmap that enables a company to achieve its overall strategy. Early in a career, PMs are really focused on shipping individual features. As PMs level up into directors and VPs, what becomes really important is how do you weave together all of those individual features into a coherent strategy that delivers the sort of business impact that's valuable to the company. So this breaks down into three things. The first one is business outcome ownership. This is the one competency that I feel like is equally important throughout a person's journey from APM all the way to VP or CPO. Never within a product manager's role should they ever be too far away from thinking about how do I make sure that the work that I'm doing has valuable outcomes for the business. And there's two important aspects of this. One is to actually focus on business outcomes rather than features. And the second one is to really think about yourself as an owner. I think the best PMs flock to responsibility for the business. They don't shy away from it, and they foster that same ownership on their teams so that PMs feel responsible for themselves and for their teams to deliver on the business impact that ultimately is going to make the company more valuable and going to improve customers' lives. The second piece is product vision and road mapping. And so this is, as I mentioned, the process of weaving together individual features into a clear, compelling, coherent vision for where the product needs to go in order to solve fundamental problems for the user. And then the last thing is strategic impact, which is the ability to think about product as a lever for the company to achieve its strategy. In today's world, where oftentimes companies are very product centric, the product is one of the most important, if not the most important lever that a company has to achieving its objectives. And so I think peak product managers from a product strategy standpoint tend to think about this ladder. They want to deliver valuable features, which ladder into a valuable roadmap, which ultimately deliver on a valuable strategy. The final piece of the puzzle for really peak product managers is influencing people. Product management is a rare role in that it starts as a leadership-oriented role from the very beginning. So APMs and PMs are really focused on leading the stakeholders around them. And then that element of leadership gets more and more emphasized as a person becomes more senior. So the first part of leadership for a product manager is stakeholder management. And I think a really key thing that I've learned about stakeholder management over the years is that actually that's the wrong term. Stakeholders don't want to be managed as much as they want to be included. And so really good PMs are able to create a circle around all the people that are interested in the product that they're working on and bring them into a virtual team and tap into all of their energy around the idea that you're building towards and leverage that energy to deliver on really effective products. That said, peak PMs are also willing to make the hard product decisions. So they understand that good product decisions are not a matter of compromising everything that stakeholders want and bringing that together into something that's dilutive and not as sharp and as opinionated as it needs to be, but instead is the ability to synthesize all of the great thinking into clear, opinionated, effective decisions for the product, and be willing to make the tough calls so that everyone is aligned towards those decisions, even the people that may have dissented. That, I think, is like one thing that really separates a fantastic PM from an average PM, is the ability to align everyone, including the people that disagree with the product direction, and then to learn from the product as it gets rolled out into the world and as you get data to figure out whether or not the correct decisions were made. The second piece is team leadership. So product managers, as they become more senior, take on direct reports, which is an important part of leveling up as a product leader. Because product managers have a significant amount of influential leadership as they develop, I think oftentimes PMs, when they get their first direct reports, fall into the trap of feeling like they've already got leadership figured out. And so ultimately, I think new new PM leaders who are managing their first direct reports need to be really thoughtful about how is managing direct reports different than managing stakeholders. And I think the really great PMs see themselves as hosts first and foremost. So they give their direct reports and their broader team the tools and autonomy necessary to succeed, rather than falling into the trap of micromanaging the people on their team. And then lastly, a really critical part of being a successful product manager is managing up. So I think about managing up a little bit differently than other leaders. I really think managing up is ultimately about getting the support you need to accomplish your goals. Peak PMs understand what their boss, what other leaders in the company are trying to achieve, and they align their work to those objectives. One thing I've seen over and over again in my career is that resources flow to the teams who are most aligned with leadership's objectives. And so if you ever feel like you're on a team that is not getting the resources that it needs, an important question to ask is, are you aligned with leadership's objectives? And does leadership understand that alignment? And if those two things are the case, oftentimes it's easier to get the resources that you need. Oftentimes the difficulty around resources comes from the fact that leaders aren't seeing the value that they want to see. They may not have expressed it that way, but they're not seeing the value that they want to see within the impact that a particular team is having. And so all of that weaves together into these 12 competencies that make for an exceptional product manager. Best being a handful versus out is strong at, and then uniting a team complements the areas, their areas of strength. And so one of the things that I've developed, and I'll have a link to it at the end of the presentation, is this chart, which you can use to draw your shape and figure out, for each of these competencies, how are you tracking? Is this an area that needs focus? Is this on track relative to expectations? Are you outperforming? And when you do that, you get a particular shape to your skills. And that shape can help you understand your development path and can understand how you fit within a team. As you think about your shape, I think one of the things that's really important is fundamentally individuals should be spiky and teams should be well-rounded. This comes out of a lot of research that's been done. One of the most important pieces of research around this is a 2011 study conducted by McKinsey, the strategy firm, and Egon Zehnder, the recruiting firm. And they really wanted to understand what separates rapidly growing companies from the average companies, and particularly what separates them in terms of how they think about leadership and leadership development. And consistently, what they found was that leaders at the highest performing companies were average or even deficient on many of the important leadership competencies. Meanwhile, at the average companies, they really focused on building well-rounded leaders. And so what they ultimately found out is that these outlier companies recognize that exceptional people do their best work when they're encouraged to use and grow their natural talents. They also recognize that talented people have weaknesses. And so these weaknesses are often in mirror image to their strengths. And the outlier companies were okay with that. They actually encouraged leaders to focus on their strengths and build a team around them that complemented their strengths. Whereas average companies encouraged their leaders to spend a lot of time addressing their weaknesses, which was something that wasn't as effective for those leaders and that caused them to be frustrated and not to generate the same results as the outlier companies. And so ultimately they figured out that the best leaders are really spiky and that the best teams are well-rounded, and they're well-rounded by gathering a set of people that are spiky in complementary areas. And so one of the reasons that I developed this framework is that I think it's really important for product managers to know their shape, because ultimately that's an unlock for them that allows them to think about themselves relative to other people and start to fit together themselves and their team like puzzle pieces. And so as you draw out your shape using this tool, there's 4 hemispheres that come into being. There's sort of an east-west hemisphere and then a north-south hemisphere. So if we look at the set of competencies from left to right, on the left side, we have a set of competencies that are really product builder competencies. So executing on product, influencing people are really focused on how do I take an idea and bring it to fruition. Whereas the competencies on the right side are really the architecture competencies. So these are things like customer insight and product strategy, where ultimately the goal is figuring out what the idea should be in the first place. And so good product teams are a lot like good construction teams. You need people to both build and you need people to design. So on a construction team, you have your construction workers that are driving the nails, they're building day to day. And you also have architects who are designing the blueprints and telling the construction teams what needs to be built. And collectively, the two work really. What's been interesting is in the construction design build firms that do both the architecture as well as and a better end product. And so it's really important for product teams to have both builders and architects. It's also really important to think about yourself and figure out what you tend towards. Do you tend to be a builder? Do you like to get shit done? Are you good at getting shit done? And you're really good at executing product? Or are you more of an architect? You like to understand what customers want and then design a product that ultimately solves those needs. That self-awareness helps you understand who to partner with. If you're a builder, then it's really important to partner with architects. If you're an architect, then it's really important to partner with builders. The second way that we can look at the competencies is north versus south. The northern competency is the product execution competency, the consumer insight competency are both really focused on sort of fundamentals of product management, whereas the influencing people area of competency and the product strategy area of competency are really focused on product leadership. And the difference between product managers and product leaders is that product managers build products, whereas product leaders build products, people, and companies. And so early on in your career, it's okay if you find that you really excel at things in the northern part of the hemisphere, because that's where it's really important to master for early PMs, especially APMs. They need to focus very intensely on mastering product execution, because ultimately shipping product is a foundation for success as a product manager. But as you get more senior in your career, PMs work themselves clockwise across these competencies and need to emphasize customer insight more. Eventually, at the director and VP level, need to emphasize product strategy and influencing people more. And so at each level within the organization, the ideal shape changes. And that's a really good reminder for people that as they get to a higher level within an org, they need to take stock of their current skills, because the things that got them to where they are not the things that will get them to the next level within their product career. And throughout this journey, I think it's really important for people to recognize that the one common thing that's equally important across all product levels is business outcome ownership. So no matter what level you are as a product manager, the best PMs focus on delivering the business impact, not just shipping features. And if you do that really well, that's a fantastic tailwind to your career as a product manager. So lastly, I'll just go through this quickly. I have a couple of archetypes that I've drawn out that show you different common types of people within product organizations. One is, some companies and new PMs confuse project management with product management and really develop the product execution competencies at the expense of some of the more strategy and customer insight oriented competencies. You may know people like this within your organization. You may have started out as one of these types of product managers. It's really important for project managers to think actively about growing their career as a product manager and leader, not just as a project manager. And that means working on customer insight and product strategy skills so that they can not only figure out what to build and get it built, but also figure out, or not only focus on getting something built, but focus on figuring out what to build. The next common archetype is people managers. So people that are really great at leading other people often move into the product organization. This is great because great people managers are able to rally teams, stakeholders, and senior leaders. They're able to create the necessary energy to turn product aspirations into product results. However, it's really important to recognize that product leadership or people leadership is just one part of product leadership. Naturally talented people managers need to also focus on customer insight and product strategy. This will give them the tools to not only lead people, but lead people to the right destination, which is building the right product. And lastly, one of the common archetypes that we see today are growth-centric PMs. So these are PMs that combine speed, analytical insight, and test-driven product development to deliver measurable gains on critical business metrics that leadership really cares about. These types of PMs excel at business outcome ownership. They excel at fluency with data. They excel at really fast product delivery. But they may need to be supported in terms of understanding what customers really want or understanding some more qualitative aspects of user experience design. And so growth-oriented PMs, I think, are essential to product today and often are an engine of growth within an organization. But it's also important for companies to recognize that these growth hacker style PMs only offer part of the solution. And ultimately, if you focus on growth at the expense of innovation, companies run the risk of being disrupted by more innovative competitors. And so ultimately, growth-centric PMs can reinforce their skills by improving their fluency with data, improving their business outcome ownership, or they can complement their skills by focusing on things they may not be naturally talented at, like the voice of the customer work or product vision and road mapping. So, this is a good example of a type of PM that is really valuable to an organization, but needs to be complemented within the organization. So that's a quick introduction to the product competency framework, as well as the SHAPE toolkit that allows you to understand what makes for a great product manager and allows you to understand what strengths you're bringing to the table. Product management, I think, is ultimately a really rare role, and that requires excellence at the opposite ends of many spectrums. You have to be both analytical and intuitive. You have to be both optimization-oriented and innovation-oriented. You have to be both strategic and tactical. You have to be both a great team leader as well as a great task manager. And most importantly, product managers need to be great at both building value for the company as well as building value for customers. It's not possible for any one PM to excel across all of these PM competencies. But the good news is you don't need to. Ultimately, your path to success as a PM, your path to success as a PM within a really successful company is understanding what you're strong at, really investing in those strengths, and then complementing yourselves with people who are good at complementary strengths.
That was a great presentation. Thank you for that. There was so many insights in there. I call them like insight mic drops, and I'm going to repeat some of them that stuck with me, right? So like, resources flow to where the leadership's objectives are. So if you're not getting resources, make sure you're aligned with those objectives. Another one I liked was, product managers are intellectual athletes, right? Really just focusing on the critical thinking that's required to be a great PM. Another one I liked was stakeholders don't need to be managed. They just want to be informed, right? Keeping them aligned with that. And the last one was product leaders manage product, people, and companies. And so we'll share all these slides with everyone after, but there's a whole bunch of questions and I'm going to go through them. Some of these questions people asked were very tactical and some of them were further out. So I'm just going to go down the list. There's a lot. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but we'll see how many we'll get. So Irfan asked a question around, this is a very tactical question. What are your thoughts on using design sprints to manage the product management workflow? How often did you actually use a design sprint to do that?
Yeah, I actually love design sprints. I've used them pretty actively. I used them a couple of times at Tinder. We actually did a whole month of design sprints to work through some really tough product challenges. I've used them in other roles as well. I found design sprints are really good when you have a product challenge that feels somewhat intractable. And you can't get there through the standard process. So they require a pretty significant commitment of time. They also require a significant commitment of time across multiple different functions within an organization. And so ultimately you have to ask yourself, is getting past this block that we're experiencing going to be even higher benefit than taking those people's time and applying it to the design sprint? So it's a little bit of a return on investment calculation that you need to make. The investment is really high, but the return can also be incredibly high if you are faced with the right question. And so I think for, during the course of ordinary product work where you can kind of suss out what the right answer is through standard methodologies and good day-to-day team interaction, you don't necessarily need to have a design sprint. But when you're facing one of these intractable problems, you don't quite know how to solve it for the customer, or you may not even know what the customer problem is. I think a design sprint is a great way to kind of step back, break through that wall, figure out the problem, figure out the solution, and coming out of a really well-run sprint process, you're going to have so much more context than you would have otherwise, that it will get you back to that ability to have rapid day-to-day
Awesome.
iteration on the product.
There's another question around the APM program that you developed at TripAdvisor. Excuse me. I mean, you're not going into a lot of details, but what were some characteristics that made that APM successful? What was the level of mentorship required from product leaders in the company? Just generally speaking, can you talk a little bit about that? And the reason we're asking is that the framework you have is very well thought out. So that means that, that mentorship program was obviously successful. So what are some of your thoughts on other companies that have product managers, they want to coach them? What does it take to make a successful APM program?
So the thing that we looked for, we basically had three things that we would look for when we hired people into that product rotation program. The first one was an innate love of products and an innate sensibility about what makes a good product. So that's something that anyone can have. You don't necessarily need to be a product manager for that. One of the questions that I use to suss that out is, tell me a product that you use in your daily life and you love. And then, I'd have the person tell me about the product, and then I'd ask them to tell me about something that doesn't work well about it. And then I'd walk with them through that process of building a feature to solve a pain point in a product that they use every day, to see how introspective they are about product. The second thing that was really important was grit. So it was the ability to persevere through challenges and really push through challenges no matter what you face. And there's some good questions you can ask around challenges that people have faced and how they've dealt with those challenges. And then the third piece was around analytics, and using analytics not for insight, but also to turn insight into decision making, which many people who are in business school or in undergrad have had experience with. So if you find someone that's got like an innate product sensibility, has a lot of perseverance, can think really critically about the data that they have and make good decisions with it, that becomes sort of like the fundamental ingredient that you need to put someone into a new product role and give them the skills that will make them a successful product manager over time. Some of them will be great at it. Some, won't be the right fit, but that's something that you can figure out over time. I found more people were great at it than not when you looked for those three things. The other thing that we did was we put together a pretty intensive set of training within their first 3 months on the job, which helped them level up in specific areas that they may not have had experience with. That included things like user interface design, how technology works, going deeper into analytics, going deeper into user research, going deeper into localization. So things that really gave them the hard skills that they would need to be good PMs.
Good insights for those that are looking to get into product management. So some great tips there. Another question, there was a whole bunch of questions around, stakeholders don't need to be managed, they have to be informed. Do you have any tips or recommendations on how to manage up and get in alignment with stakeholders?
Yeah, and so I think, depending on who your stakeholder is, it may be that they want to get informed, it may be that they want to be included. I think ultimately, within companies, especially the companies that we're in, where product plays such a central role, everyone feels attached to the product and has opinions about the product, has things that they feel will work or won't work, and has a unique perspective based on the role that they're playing within the company. And I think oftentimes product teams get into issues when they sort of are possessive about the product and think about the product as their domain and don't open it up to the rest of the company. And then as a result, the product to stakeholder relationship can get strained. But if you really open it up and you include everyone and you kind of in that, and you think about everyone as part of the product team, but where the product manager's decision is, or the product manager's role is ultimately to make the decisions, that can be a way that, you can get everyone included in the process. You can source the best ideas. And ultimately, if you do that well, if you do that sort of with high emotional intelligence, people will understand that at the end of the day, you need to make a decision. It may not be aligned with what they thought was the right place to go. But if you handle that well, they'll be on board with it. And then even better is when you make a decision that's informed by what your stakeholders bring to the table, and then they can feel like they really are part of the product process and feel more aligned with a successful outcome. So I think that's like the number one tip I would have is make sure that your process is inclusive, make sure that it's emotionally intelligent, and make sure that you are trying to source the best ideas from as many people as possible. And then lastly, be really mindful and thoughtful about how you communicate decisions so that they feel like people were included in the decision and understand why the decision was made
Cool.
rather than executing
your experiences at some of the top consumer companies, Tinder, Facebook, TripAdvisor, Microsoft, do you think that this competency chart would change in any way for if you were a B2B product manager or product leader, or would it approximately be the same?
I think it's the same for B2B. We deliberately designed it to work effectively for both the B2C teams as well as B2B teams at TripAdvisor. So TripAdvisor has a fairly large part of the product team that is hotelier facing or restaurateur facing, as well as other people that are focusing on internal tools, other people that are focusing on different types of enterprise integrations. And so that was something that we wanted to be mindful of, that it would work across different types of product roles. Ultimately, I think the thing that really changes is your customer insight piece. So your customer is different in those cases, and sometimes you'll have more or less emphasis on data depending on whether or not you're in an enterprise-oriented product role or more in a B2C role. But I think you can work equally well across all different product
Victor
teams.
asked a question. What types of unique challenges, opportunities do you see when developing product managers into product leaders, if they tend to be stronger product builders versus product architects?
So that's a really good question. I think that's something that product managers have to deliberately think about as they level up into product leaders, is that they're going to be asked both to take on increasing scope, which will be good because as good product builders, they'll be able to handle that scope. But they're also going to be asked to take on increasing responsibility for the strategy. And that's often an area where a strong product builder will have the most opportunity for growth. And I do feel like strong product leaders need to have both the strategy piece as well as the people leadership piece. And so that's something that I would encourage a PM who is a strong builder, who wants to level up within their organization, to be really proactive about, is to learn about company strategy, learn about product strategy, talk with people that are in strategic roles within the company to understand the decisions that they're making, learn about the business model, learn about the financial part of the company. If it's pre-revenue, what the fundraising and investment process looks like. If they're post-revenue, what the revenue model looks like, what the P&L looks like. All of those things are really important as you grow within an organization. And so, for people that are naturally good at product architecture, I think they have a tailwind. As for people that are not on the builder side, I think they need to really they can grow. I don't think, somebody asked me the other day, is strategic thinking an innate skill or an innate trait, or is it a learned skill? I absolutely believe strategic thinking is a learned skill, and if you apply yourself to that, you can get much better at strategic thinking. It's just a matter of most people aren't doing that day to day, and so
awesome.
It's not
That's
a skill
great.
they've had a chance to foster.
Speaking about strategic skills, Karen asked, what are some core elements of a strong product strategy document or principles that you would consider when you're thinking about product strategy?
One of the things I really recommend for people that want to learn more about strategy is there's a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which does a really nice job about making the distinction between goal setting, which people often conflate with strategy, and actual strategy setting. And one of the things that he talks a lot about within the book is that good strategy is a matter of creating a coherent, self-reinforcing plan that's based on the particular positional advantages that a company has. And so, it's not that different than a game of chess or than military strategy. You're going to have a set of assets as a company. As a startup, your asset might be that you're really nimble. As an established company, your asset might be an established audience. You're going to have a set of things that you're really strong at as a company. You're going to have things that you're not as strong at as a company. And developing good strategies is a matter of understanding what's going to generate value for the company and aligning those with the assets and strengths of the company. And so ultimately, I think that's the first part in product strategy is understanding the company strategy, defining it in a really clear way that people understand what the context is that the company's operating in and what strengths it brings to the table. And then in a very terse way, be very clear about the things strategically that the company is trying to accomplish. So another thing that the author talks about in that book is good strategy is very specific. It's not grand and abstract. And so oftentimes people think about strategic documents as being kind of fluffy and broad and not really concrete. Those aren't that helpful, particularly in terms of figuring out product strategy. If you can be very concrete about what specifically you're trying to accomplish from a strategic perspective, then it becomes much easier to take that and build a product strategy doc around those concrete elements.
Guys, if you enjoyed those insights, you've got to follow Ravi. I just shared his Twitter page here, so go ahead and follow Ravi, and I think you'll enjoy that. So there's many, many more questions. We're not able to get to those, but what I'll do is, Ravi, I'll send you the questions, and maybe you can kind of take some time to answer them, and we'll send it to all the 400 people that have registered and signed up for it. So with that, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the event. If you did enjoy the event, I have an ask. Please spread the word about it. Please tag at Product Faculty on LinkedIn and Twitter saying that you enjoyed the event, and then we'll appreciate that. And with that, we'll head over to networking. And so this is really interesting. It's a really fun feature. How networking works is that Ravi, could you stop presenting? Yeah, there we go. So
yeah. Give me one sec.
So guys, you just gotta press that presentation button. There we go. Okay. Great. So thank you everyone for attending, and Ravi for a lot of those insights. We'll send out these slides and all the questions that came with it. And now we're gonna head over to the networking portion of this. And so for networking, how that works is you simply head over to the networking tab. And once you head over to the networking tab, you say you're ready to go, and then you can go and meet with anybody that's on here for 3 minutes. Both Ravi and I will be there. So we hope to network with you guys and look forward to seeing you there. So once more, if you enjoy the event, please tag at Product Faculty on LinkedIn and Twitter, and hope to see you guys at the next one. And let's head on over to networking.